The NCAA versus Tennessee and Virginia. And by the way, we've got the coolest shirts coming up celebrating the fact that the University of Tennessee, a lot of people in here, that's your team, took on the NCAA. Which, can I stop for a second, everybody? That's just freaking awesome, is it not?
I mean, it's epic, and I give the university credit, and we're going to talk about this in a minute because I give the university a heck of a lot more credit than I give the state of Tennessee public officials credit for.
Well, I don't care who it is. I don't want to get into the politics of it. I think that they are ultimately driving the university.
The university's driving it. Yes, they're the ones driving it. But as we get into this lawsuit, we're going to realize that there was a fatal, not a fatal, but there's a giant flaw in how the state pursued this, and something they should have addressed before they decided to pursue this, which we'll get into.
Good reporting, and I want to give him credit. Good reporting by Chris Vanini. And let's start out with one of his tweets, which lays out exactly what both sides are thinking. So the NCAA's legal response to the Tennessee-Virginia lawsuit over NIL recruiting is in. It argues that Tennessee's, this is how fast this is moving, guys. I mean, this is not going to be a wait 2 or 3 years sort of thing. Tennessee's own state law bars NIL for recruiting. Case fails to show irreparable harm. Court relief is to preserve status quo, and NCAA rules are status quo, would create chaos. That is their response. My response to that is this. If Tennessee's own state law bars NIL for recruiting, first of all, that's stupid. Cops are not going to break away from a murder case to go check out some NIL issue. I mean, that's just not going to happen. Second, when you talk about the state laws behind that, well, they're different. In Missouri, Eli Drinkwitz can sit in front of a prospect and a prospective advertiser and help them negotiate a deal. So that to me just sounds like the typical ignorant NCAA response. Let me throw something out there that sounds kind of good. And if you really don't know the sport, then maybe you'll be okay with that. And you'll just say, oh, well, I'll roll with that. It must be a state law. Well, then every state's different. Then you're practically giving Missouri a one-up on every other program in the nation. Chris Vanini also reported this. He said the Tennessee-Virginia Attorney General response to the NCAA is in. It argues this: NIL deals for recruits aren't pay for play. Let's start with that one. They aren't pay for play. I mean, I know it's pay for appearance. I had a great lunch with Jacob Warren over the weekend and just loved working with him and paid him. And it was awesome. Good to see him. But I know it's for image and likeness. But if he's not playing football, we're not paying him or anybody else. Caleb, let's not be silly.
I agree, but I actually want to go back to your state law first point, because that's what I wanted to hit to. You're totally wrong on this. This was a giant mistake by Tennessee, because the problem is this. The Tennessee Attorney General is suing the whole point of the state of Tennessee's argument is that NIL restrictions are antitrust violations. Well, if that's the case, your own freaking state is violating antitrust laws right now with an NIL law. And so the NCAA's point is this. All they're saying, they're not saying that because of this, we're allowed to investigate. What the NCAA is saying is, how can you sue us for something that you're doing? How can you say when we do it, it's illegal, but you're doing it at the state level? You're saying we're in violation of federal law. Well, based on the Constitution, federal law does trump state law. So you're in violation of federal law at the state level. And you're suing us for the exact thing that you're breaking the law for. I think that's the NCAA's argument. And this was a fatal, stupid flaw by Tennessee. How in the world, knowing, and I got to go back a couple of years ago, because Dave, NIL started, 2021, right?
Yeah, it was Bryce Young's freshman year, yes.
That means the state had to proactively pass this law. How in the world could they have proactively, stupidly passed this law, knowing that this was going to be a fight down the road with the NCAA and that they lost some leverage? That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I did not know that state officials, state lawmakers thought it was a good idea to pass that law. That is stupid. A quick question from Daniel on the message board. How is the state breaking the law? No, what the state is doing. So, Daniel, federal law trumps state law. The state is suing the NCAA saying they're in violation for federal law, but their own state law is in violation of federal law. So for them to cite federal law to defend Tennessee, while at the same time themselves violating that federal law, the intent of the person in a lawsuit does matter to a lot of. Now, I think Tennessee's right. I think Tennessee is right that it is a violation of federal law. I think Tennessee now has the state of Tennessee, not the school, has lost the cards to be able to sue, though. They should withdraw from the lawsuit and let Virginia handle this lawsuit, because that is beyond stupid that they passed that law. That's the dumbest thing I've ever known a state to do, and I cannot believe that they did that. And so that's where I'm at with that. Now, as far as NIL deal for recruits aren't paid for play, yeah, I think I don't like that response by Tennessee and Virginia, because the whole point of this lawsuit is they're trying to argue that it should be pay for play, that it should be allowed because you're restricting market if you don't allow pay for play. So I think they hurt themselves in that lawsuit. But yes, and also just on the principle of it, yes, that's a flat out lie. It's pay for play. We know it's pay for play. They both of those attorney generals know that the schools do it as pay for play. So it's laughable to pretend otherwise.
It is. I mean, Jacob would have laughed at that when I had lunch with him. Been like, I know why you're paying me. It's not because I'm a good-looking dude and a nice guy. Hey, I want to take issue with one of our posters here, Derek. Okay, so this to me, Derek, I respect your opinion, but I think it's misguided. Said I may be done with football in general. A super conference, we just, I don't know, disintegrate? I don't know what that word is. Sounds stupid. Let's just water everything down. The SEC downfall should have never went the ESPN route. So, Caleb, you're an opinionated person, but open your mind for just a second and go with me on this. If college football 5 years from now is like the NFL, and it is awesome game from noon to midnight. It is matchups against rated teams, the top 32, 38 teams theoretically in the nation. That to me is a much better way of going about things than what they have now, which is schedule your own opponent. So some teams play tougher non-conference schedule, some play others. I want the whole schedule laid out. I want it to be a reveal like the NFL.
I like college. I'm going to be honest. I think there's a middle ground here, which is I like college football with 70 to 80 teams, because I want college football to still be a nationwide sport. I don't want it to be the NFL minor league, because I will tell you this: if you make it like the NFL minor league, then you're going to make it irrelevant in about 50 years.
Okay, but let me interrupt.
Because how's minor league baseball doing right now?
Well, that's a whole different reason. But let me argue this for just a second. I, as a consumer, don't care if Tennessee plays Oregon State because they may be considered a top 70, 80 school. I do care if Tennessee plays UCLA because they're a top 38 school. That to me, you're only going halfway. If you're going to do this, you got to go the whole way. If you're essentially, what you're doing is just lopping off some of the lower funded college football programs in the nation. That to me is not what this is about. This is about creating a better product week in and week out from noon to midnight every Saturday, noon to midnight every Saturday. Rick Terry Jewelry Design. They want to be your jeweler. That's Rick Terry Jewelry Design, looking for affordable game day jewelry. How about the Fire Opals, a Tennessee tradition? RickTerryJewelry.com. That's RickTerryJewelry.com. Thoughts on that, Caleb?
I still disagree and think it should be larger. Look,
hold
on, let me finish. If you make it just like the NFL, where it's like 32 teams and it's the best product, it's just a lesser version of the NFL. Well, then it's going to fall into irrelevancy, because people will say, why watch this when I can watch the NFL? College football is uniquely different as a sport, and you're trying to make it, and I don't want it to go the NFL model. So like, I like college football being national and hyper regional in different ways at the same time. The regionality of college football still has some value to a certain degree. That's one of the things that does make it different.
Well, I'll make your argument stronger. There is when you spread Wait a second. So you're telling me it's a national sport, but it really isn't.
No, I mean, I want it to be nationwide, but hyper regional, where like regional rivalries matter, regional
Mm,
connections matter.
no.
I just want the teams in the regions to matter. So for instance, Tennessee, Alabama is worth it. Tennessee, Vanderbilt is not. That's where I'm at.
That absolutely will not work because it's NASCAR. It's exactly what NASCAR did. NASCAR wanted to say hyper focused in the Southeast, but grow their races. So they took races away from Southern tracks and they moved them out to Fontana and they moved them out to other places, to Texas, and it killed the sport. I think you have to be really laser focused. Just like when we do this program, we don't get on willy nilly and just take a bunch of phone calls and ramble on. We have a laser focus. I think your laser focus, instead of regionality in this situation, needs to be the best teams. So if you can work regionality into that, great. But I think you're trying to grow the same way NASCAR did, and I think you're going to end up eroding your strongest fan base.
Okay. Look, this is a totally different debate for another day because I actually want to have a debate one day as if college football should go national or not because I disagree. I think NASCAR already was a hyper regional sport. Football is not a hyper regional sport. College football got regional because the SEC got so dominant, which is a different story altogether.
Let me bring up Daniel's question, who had one for you, and we can agree to disagree on that. We can have that discussion another day. But we want you to hit the like button. If you're just getting on board, hit that like button. We ask you that you turn your notifications on. We had Cooper Mays drop over the weekend. Did you know? Well, if you had your notifications on, you did. Daniel says, I'm not really sure I understand. I get what you're saying, but every federal law has a similar state law. I just don't understand what part of the Tennessee law violates the federal ruling. I'm going to give you my thoughts, and then Caleb probably can provide better insight. Well, the states have individual laws against NIL, and there is no federal law against NIL. So the states are basically the ones left to govern it, which is STUPID. That makes no sense.
Here's what is happening, Daniel. There's the federal law is the Sherman Antitrust Act. If Dave's business grows, Dave can't artificially collude with people with me. If we grow really big and we have a bunch of employers, we can't artificially find ways to keep employees from getting paid. That would violate the Antitrust Act unless they collectively bargained. Right?
If we get caught.
Yeah. Okay. Exactly. But yeah, companies that have a monopoly on something where they can't restrict pay for people unless those people collectively bargain, that's a violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act, which is a federal law passed in, I guess, 1889, something like that. Okay. Anyways, it's basically to make sure monopolies don't have too much power. And the NCAA is a monopoly. This is why NIL was legalized in the first place, because it was found out that the NCAA restricting NIL pay was a direct violation of federal law, which was the Antitrust Act. The state law is saying that NIL is fine, but it can't be used for recruiting. What the state of Tennessee is doing is they are suing the NCAA, saying that restricting NIL for recruiting is a violation of federal law. Well, if that's the case, you, the state of Tennessee, are in violation of federal law by passing a law that restricts NIL for recruiting. Just to give you a quick example, for instance, when the Civil Rights Act passed in 1964 that barred segregation. It barred states from segregating. So now if a state passes a law saying we're going to have a whites only section and a blacks only section, that's in direct violation of federal law because the federal government has a law that's saying you can't do that. It's very similar with this. The federal government is having a law saying you're not allowed to restrict players. You cannot restrict, monopolies can't restrict people. Monopolies can't violate the Antitrust Act. There's a federal law, you can't violate the Antitrust Act. States then can't go around it and say, we're going to pass a law that requires people to violate the Antitrust Act, which is what if you're saying that using NIL for recruiting purposes is a violation of the Antitrust Act, well, then you can't have a law in your own state that bans NIL for recruiting purposes. And that's the NCAA's argument against Tennessee. They really stepped in it, Tennessee, by having that law. And they had to actively pass that law. I don't know when it was passed. I found that out just on Saturday, and I haven't done my research on it. I should. But I cannot believe they passed that law. Now, the other NCAA arguments are stupid. Like one of the NCAA arguments, because the NCAA keeps saying that it would create chaos. Their argument is basically this. yeah, it's a violation of federal antitrust laws, but we should be able to be exempt from this because otherwise bad things will happen. Well, that's not an argument in court, right, Dave? You can't sit there and say I should be allowed to violate federal law, otherwise bad things will happen that we don't want. You can't make that argument.